So I'm going to introduce our speaker, Bill Womeldorf, and he's passionate about sustainability and helping underutilized sites and blighted buildings become more energy efficient. And locally, he works with the Valley CDC, or the Valley Community Development Corporation. And recently, he's been managing the rehabilitation of the former Northampton Nursing Home into 60 affordable apartments. This project is going to feature geothermal energy, thanks to funding from the Department of Energy Resources and climate-ready housing programs. And this is the project that he's going to be telling us about tonight. So take it away, Bill.
Awesome. Well, I have my screen shared, so if people can nod, seeing if you can see it, and I'm assuming you can hear me. So I'm Bill. You can call me Bill. I work over at Valley CDC. We're out of Northampton on Pleasant Street. We do affordable housing. We do particularly affordable housing for folks who are, extremely low income. But this project in particular, we do a mix of workforce and low income housing. I'm going to dive into two aspects of the project, kind of a brief overview of the project and some of the features of it. And then I'm going to talk kind of at the request of you folks here, kind of the funding mechanisms that allowed that project to proceed into construction. Right now, we're about 4 or 5 months into construction. So it's very exciting, and I'm really looking forward to sharing information with you guys. But first, I want to kind of give some context to my background. I studied architecture. I kind of moved quickly into more of a building science strat, and really kind of took that to heart. I grew up in the kind of understanding of the climate context, and then in my classes was learning a lot about the solutions, and since then I kind of worked at different architecture firms, engineering practices. I got involved in some, what you would call like, activism in Boston, and since then moved back out to Western Mass, which is, really my home, and I love it out here. I got it into rental housing, and kind of owned a management company. So I did actually a lot of construction. I hold my construction supervisor's license, and basically was renovating apartment buildings, and for a while, and Laura Baker, who works at Valley CDC, brought me into work at Valley to basically kind of run the nursing home project, from my experience with adaptive reuse, and with the kind of more building science technical aspects. I do actually kind of consider myself a self-learned in the finance strategy. I was very I was excited that I was complimented by a few of my colleagues that one of my strong suits that they noted was finance, which I never would have expected. It's something that was so far away from me maybe 10 years ago, but it is turning into be just a part of a tool of the real estate development career, is that you become a finance expert, and you understand contracts and law. You understand a lot of different things. So that's really my background, is touching on a lot of stuff, and because of that, you kind of that's how you're really able to successfully manage a project like this size, is you kind of have to understand what's going in, from the very little details and up to the kind of the bigger picture. Um, so for folks who don't know about the nursing home, it's a rather large site in Northampton. It's 6 acres, and it was built in the 70s. It was built during the heyday of asbestos, so pretty much everything in the building had asbestos. About a year ago, we did a hazmat abatement phase to the project. It was over $1 million of abatement. Pretty much everything you see here was basically what didn't have asbestos. So all the finishes had asbestos, all the insulation, a lot of the old studs had asbestos on it, from the overspray. But we were really happy to see that the bones of the building were really intact. These were elements like the concrete and the steel that are really high embodied carbon. And a lot of folks, a lot of developers, when they looked at this site, wanted to take this all down and build something new. I'm a big believer that the greenest building is the building that we can reuse. And because of that, I'm very proud that we saved all this carbon. One of the things that I know originally when I started in this field was a lot of people were really focused on building energy aspect. But I did the calculations on the amount of concrete and steel in here, and it basically saves the equivalent carbon of about 30 to 40 years of the building use. So it's an extreme amount that is saved, and I think one of the kind of defining features of some of the part of the adaptive reuse, but also part of that green strategy. We are going to do 60 apartments and mix of some office space. We really like that this project's going to be majority of family housing, so 2 beds or 3 bed units. This is a real priority of the state. We have 10 apartments that are going to be set aside for folks who are or families that are currently unhoused. We have a lot of different units for accessibility. It's a really key aspect of the project, largely from its prior use as a nursing home. All the entrances were at grade. There's 2 elevators in the building, which we have 6-story buildings that don't have 2 elevators. So having the 2 elevators here is a real benefit. We're doing what's called the deep energy retrofit. I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's a different scale here. We really liked that the building brick was in really good condition. We looked originally about reskinning it and kind of modernizing it with a metal paneling system. But the cost was really substantial. And, I think looking back to, how the building looks, the brick is in really great shape. So we decided to keep it and embrace it. But instead of focusing on that weatherization, because you can only go so far with an existing building where you don't want to create mold issues on the inside, we decided to double down on the mechanical systems. So we were able to do a geothermal well field. So it's about 44 wells. Originally, when we thought about this, it was I actually was the one who was ruling it out and telling folks that I thought it was only for universities and organizations with much deeper and bigger pockets to do a system like this. I've never seen it done for affordable housing. I started actually researching other projects in Vermont that are kind of similar that did this. And it kind of bolstered my confidence in the system. The system we selected is called a closed loop geothermal system. An open loop geothermal system actually pumps water from the ground and then dumps it into a reservoir. For a system of this size, you actually would only need 2 wells to do an open loop system versus the 44 wells that we have is a closed loop system, which basically means it's all the liquid stays within the pipes. It doesn't pump or extract any water from the ground. It's just basically a refrigerant loop that's installed in the ground. The kind of the negative of this system, I guess, is that it's 44 wells, right? So the cost of it is, almost maybe 5 to 6 times of the open well concept. So I did do a variety of grant applications, and I did 2 that I thought were a little bit of a moonshot, but I got funding from the Department of Energy Resources for their decarbonization program, and then the Mass Housing Partnership has a climate ready housing program that we also got funding for, largely for the electrification of the hot water. Kind of switching gears to the construction development budget. So we have a word in affordable housing or in development called total development costs. It's inclusive of the acquisition, reserves, soft costs, developer fee, contingencies, and the actual hard cost of the construction. So this is really what the GC is charging, but there's a lot of other additional costs, particularly more so for affordable housing. due to, all the different state regulations that we need to adhere to. Out of that construction budget, I did find it interesting to just break it apart to, so folks can see kind of what we're spending money on for construction. Really, I kind of summarize it in maybe like 10 categories just to give folks an idea. I got my mechanical, electrical, plumbing figure, and then I got my geothermal wells, the solar PV. Part of the geothermal system is also the mechanical system, but I've really extracted the well cost because that's really the kind of additional cost of the system versus, if you were just to do an air source heat pump system. So how do you usually finance real estate projects? Usually do there's two real mechanisms. There's debt and equity. It's the kind of the basics, the ABC, so to speak, of real estate financing. So in most cases, any source of funding you get either takes the form of either debt or equity. And I think it's an important just kind of hierarchy concept for you to understand is before we get into some of the details. Affordable housing is a little bit trickier of a world, and you'll find there's many different flavors of that debt and equity. So a project like this has about 15 to 16 funding sources. It's to call it a monumental effort, it would be an understatement. It truly is a challenge to piece together all the different aspects of the project from a financing level. In this case, senior debt is basically our, what we would call hard debt, or it's, debt that like when you buy a house and you take out a loan, it's similar to that where you're paying on it. Mezzanine debt is a little bit of a complex term, but you can kind of think of it as true debt that you're paying on, but it kind of, tags on to like a senior debt. Sometimes you see it with PACE financing as a mezzanine loan. In our case, Mass Housing has a kind of a workforce housing loan, which is a cash flow sharing loan, and that kind of acts as our mezzanine debt. Kind of moving on to the purple area, we have what's considered soft debt or subordinated debt. So these are basic loans that are loans, but they're usually kind of like low interest, no interest. They come typically from the state, and they're basically a trade of between, they'll provide a loan that's either, no payment for, 40 years, with the idea is that you're going to be providing a restriction to the property. In our case, it's an affordable housing restriction. As long as you're maintaining that restriction, they usually will not call those loans due. Typically, they extend, at the maturity date. And then, from there, sometimes they be refinanced to, recapitalize the building. But they're basically called soft debt. Typically don't pay on them, but that's a big funder of our projects. It's one of the larger funds. From there, we have state LIHTC. We have, and I would say federal LIHTC, but they kind of branch into two different flavors because of how the funds come in. Federal LIHTC needs to be brought to the owner. So we usually form a syndication. That syndication, I always think of it as not I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, but it never feels the right thing in the sense because usually these are folks or large companies that have a huge tax liability. They're big insurance companies, they're big banks, sometimes high net worth individuals, but they're folks who have a lot of federal tax liability. They'll basically buy into the property, and we use that money to buy plywood and other items on site. But then they own 99% of the property, so they can get 99% of the tax credits. That's really one of the big drivers of our affordable housing projects is that LIHTC program. We can't really do what we do without it. Beyond there, I say sponsor equity, which for us is grant writing. Valley usually doesn't put its own cash into projects particularly, but what we do is we put a lot of time into, grant writing and, applying for other types of funding. And that usually is what I call the gap, right? It's the kind of the key part of the project that, you can get all these other pieces, but this is the part that will, if you don't have this, you don't have the project. Um, We'll pause pretty much after this slide, I think, just to kind of let people digest, and then we can kind of go back because it's a lot. It's very complex. These are the funding sources of the project. I've tried to color code them based on that just to give folks a sense. And this is actually the real kind of breakdown of the project, just between us here, just to kind of see. Um, Largely the strategy is that a lot of these programs fund specific aspects of the project, so it becomes a real kind of Tetris or a puzzle to basically piece together these things. Some programs may say, hey, we need to have half of your units at 60% of the area median income, and you can't have anything over 100%. While another program may say, hey, we want to fund workforce units at 80 to 100%, and we want to fund this many of them. So you're kind of piecing together all these different funding sources. Some of them don't really focus on the housing. Some of them focus on like the decarbonization. Some of them focus on the accessibility. Some of them focused on the hazmat asbestos abatement that we did. They all really kind of, and I think the part of it, and kind of where I find a lot of the fun of it is piecing together and creating that picture and creating those, the balanced budget that allows us to, reliably go through construction. Another one I'll add in here is the renewable energy tax credit. We did expand it to include geothermal. It was, originally it was just for the solar PV, but we were able to capture a lot of tax credits from the geothermal system. This is really my last slide, and then we'll basically pause and we can kind of circle back around and ask questions. I really like to not talk the whole time. I always really like to hear what folks have to say, especially in a group like this. But I think this is an important slide for me, and I think where I'll spend a little bit of this last time presenting. Mainly because I want folks to come out of this with an idea of like what would really help create more of these projects, right? Like what would really, allow for this not to be the only, project that gets rehabilitated with these funds. And I think a part of it is really the foundation of this project and where we couldn't have went anywhere without is the local support of the city of Northampton. And the city supported us in many ways. First, they provided a zoning overlay district that allowed this project to basically meet zoning. It's a residential area of single families and smaller properties. We also got $1 million from the city of Northampton through CDBG funds, CPA funds, and then short-term rental funds, and that $1 million for a small city like Northampton is a monumental amount of money for this project. And I think the state sees it, and they saw it for us certainly, and we're able to dish out a lot more state funds to match that $1 million. At this point in the process, you can't even get into the state funding rounds without local support. They won't even allow you to go into the round. But also we did get a bus station and a bike share station that really helped, just some of the kind of, showing that, demonstrating that support. From there, we really, we kind of tease out the different aspects of this project that differ from, if you were just to build a, new affordable housing structure, what's different about this project? And the hazmat was definitely a key, just the blighted building that folks wanted to see revitalized. The geothermal, we capitalized on the fact that, the state really wants to find unique and innovative ways to green the housing stock. And I was able to connect the dots really well from understanding and demonstrating a technical knowledge of it, but also saying, hey, this is how we can deploy that. And then the large scale PV, I think, by now, I think PV is very expected on projects, but for us, the rooftop was so large, it's, we can have a pretty good sized solar array, which garners attention. And that attention allows us to get state support, which ultimately is the part that really funds the project. Our big funders were through the LIHTC program, variety of these smaller sources in purple from the affordable housing bond funding. A lot of that bond funding already exists, but the latest bond bill really just kind of refills the coffers of that. And then mass housing through their HUD risk share program and their workforce incentives, we're able to really provide that diverse funding mix that allowed us to fill up the $32 million that we needed to break ground. And these are some photos of the project, just to get folks, we're about 5 months in, and we've got 20 out of the 44 wells dug, and there's the well driller right here. And then, yeah, I think I'll pause it at this stage and let me know if folks want to go back and look at certain aspects of the slide or ask any questions. I'm happy to answer.
So for questions, if you can use your Zoom hand that pops you to the top.
And hopefully I didn't go too fast too. I know sometimes I try to, move and show enough stuff to get folks information, but let me know if you're going to clarify anything.
Yeah, Tina, go ahead.
Thanks. This is a super exciting presentation. I drive by this property every day, and it's just wonderful to see it taking shape. And it's incredible the amount of work and energy you've put into this, and it's just so great to see this happening in Northampton. My question is really around the remaining land in the landscape and what plans there are for the green space, for multi-use garden space, anything else that's environmentally sensitive, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I knew I should have gave the site plan, but I will work off what I have. So basically we decided that, and this doesn't show it really well, but if you know the site, you know that there's a large frontage on Bridge Road. And Bridge Road can be noisy. We had some noise studies done and some traffic studies to really look at and understand the conditions. Ultimately, we decided to use these back little areas here as a playground and kind of like a walking Zen garden area here. Largely because it's family housing, so we wanted folks to really be encouraged to stay kind of in safer areas of the property, not to venture out on the exterior. I am gonna look at I'm looking at certain ways to kind of discourage folks from running out into the road, I guess. And I think plantings, we're doing a lot of new plantings. I think we have about 200 new trees that are going to go in on the frontage of the building, and I think part of that is we brought in Berkshire Design to really do a thought out analysis on the site, and because there's so much landscape there that it really warranted bringing in a professional landscape architect to kind of guide us on what works and what's not going to work here. And then I guess I would just add, we do have 2 bike share stations that we're going to do. So we have the EV bike share, like the rental one where you can go and grab a bike, but we have private bike storage on site for about 60 bikes. And the idea is that, the bike trail is actually right over here. We're providing a pedestrian access and then a sidewalk that'll bridge kind of into that bike trail over here. We hope a lot of people are going to, utilize other means of transportation and provide that choice of mobility. I do think there's a lot of parking, so we do have a lot of EV chargers. But I think the EV chargers was kind of a code-driven thing. I think the bikes and walkability is for me more of a passion. Thanks, Tina.
Any garden space for the people who live there?
Sure. So that's an excellent question. We've really we've done enough development where we've done garden spaces and we haven't. What we've decided on this one after a series of kind of discussions with other kind of similar projects that have family housing to figure out what's recommended. We provided a lot more what I would call vanilla box spaces, right? So that we have in the inside we have some community rooms that we kind of just programmed for a variety of things. We have space on this site for basically a multi-use area that could either be a garden, it could be a pickleball court, it could be, it could be just a pavilion. But the idea is that we don't know who's going to live in here, and we don't know who's going to call it their home. We want to wait till residents occupy the building, form some sort of coalition and understanding of what they want to see. And then, go about it from there. I think we want to provide and build out the spaces for residents, but we don't want to assume that folks are going to utilize certain amenities and certain aspects prematurely.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you. This is so exciting. But I did miss a little bit about the ins and outs of the funding. Or you put it all together. So
I
it's
know
I mean, a lot of different sources, right? So I guess what my question is though, what is the trickiest part about putting together a project like this and finding more projects like this to do? Is it finding an appropriate property, or is it getting all the funding to come together at the right time? I mean, where are the biggest challenges?
That's a good question. I think it really depends. I think in Hampshire County where we do a lot of work, we try to spread our projects around to different cities within the county. And some cities and towns are more challenging to work in than others. One of the things I mentioned earlier is we can't really even apply for state funding unless we have some level of local support. And that support can be funding, but it could be other things like a zoning support. It could be things like that bus station. I find I'm not going to mention specific towns and whatnot, but we've run across that sometimes we hit a lot more traction in other cities when we go through the permitting process. In my hometown, we actually have a lot of NIMBYs right now who don't really want housing. No to urbanization signs are prevalent. I think stuff like that is challenging because it takes a lot of effort to put together a project like this, and it only makes it so much more worse when you have to battle the city or the constituents that may not want to see this project right next to them. In our case with the former nursing home, it was unanimous that all the folks around the property that we met were very excited to see it get renovated and was excited to see it not be, torn down and put bigger and, new construction mass on the site. I think more than not, this was a very easy permitting process. In our case, the challenge with this one was, we really kind of hoped for it to be an ARPA project that was going to get a lot of the state ARPA funds. We kind of missed it where, they came and went very quickly. So we had to pivot strategies and that's where I had to kind of get grant writing for the some of the other programs. Otherwise, the geothermal system was very quickly to get cut, and that was something I wanted to kind of really defend because I knew it was we're providing the utilities for all the residents here for 99 years, so there was kind of like a moral responsibility of we don't want to get creamed when it comes to occupying this and paying 60 utility bills was going to be something that a small nonprofit like us at Valley we really didn't want to saddle ourselves with that and the unknowns of an air source system. So I feel like it's a great way to have that affordability kind of stay in perpetuity. I hope I answered your question. Local support, though, is really a key driver of these projects. I mean, they'll fizzle out and die if it's not the local support.
Nick.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering because the state tried to have a bill that went forward basically requiring construction or implementation of affordable housing. I'm wondering if you run into a lot of the obstructionism that they had with trying to get some of that in the communities that you work for, or is it something you haven't run into yet? Or you did mention a little bit about that, so.
And just so I understand your question, you're saying the state you're referring to a certain percentage of affordable housing in cities. Sometimes if they're
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a process, and most of our projects take what's called a 40B permit. And it's basically comes down to this. If the city has more than 10% of their affordable housing, of their entire housing stock is affordable, they can reject our 40B permit pretty much as of right. If it's under 10%, it's in the developer's favor, in which case the developer can appeal the permit to the state and basically kind of force the project to proceed. So you see this in, any city that isn't doing its kind of fair share of affordable housing. The idea is that, you can come in here as a developer and basically build, higher density affordable housing, really anywhere within the city, as long as it meets the 40B criteria. And in Hampshire County, there are cities that are, under that threshold, and then there's cities that are above that threshold. And I can give further examples if it's necessary, but I think I don't know if folks here are familiar with the 40B process. You don't have to be either.
Darcy, go ahead.
Yeah, I live in Amherst, and in Amherst we have, half of our population is students living in apartment complexes. So we have a ton of apartment complexes. And we are authorized to be a PACE community. The town council, and Northampton is too, they authorize themselves to be a PACE program community. But we've had difficulty getting the landlords to even talk about it. So I'm just wondering, is your program a PACE program? Do you get PACE funding, and how does it work if you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm very familiar with the PACE program. PACE program, for folks who aren't familiar with it, it's basically a loan, but it doesn't look as a loan in the sense that it's actually like a property tax assessment. So an example of this that folks have seen before PACE is like a sidewalk. Like if somebody puts a sidewalk, or the city puts a sidewalk on your property, they can charge a special assessment on that sidewalk and charge an increase. So it's kind of similar with PACE, where basically the energy improvement you're doing, basically it will increase your taxes a little bit. The idea being that, it's not taking on new debt for the property. It's providing still an increase in expense, but it's doing so in a different vehicle. So we find I find that the PACE program is a great program. It's not something that's for everybody. In our case, it is kind of true cost or true debt that is being taken on. So, if you go back to my my kind of presentation here, the PACE basically takes this kind of mezzanine debt role in a capital stack, where you are paying debt on it. You're paying like each month of some finance cost. For our affordable housing projects, sometimes there's only so much of that kind of hard debt that we can incur before we are too close to not making. Basically you want to, for these affordable housing projects, you don't want to make a lot of money, because you kind of try to dial in your debt to be where you can still basically allow yourself to do improvements, capitalize on things, and PACE I sometimes can find is a challenge for affordable housing in that regard. I find a property owner that has a large property that maybe doesn't want to take on new debt could do a PACE to upgrade windows, upgrade HVAC system. And that's usually where I've seen the PACE program really succeed in those types of projects.
Thank you. Adele?
I have to confess that your slide of the funding sources, the 15 funding sources, was like alphabet soup to me.
Oh, I know. And a part of it, is a little bit of it's a part of the challenge of affordable housing, honestly, is that there's so many different funding sources. All of them are all very complex.
Yeah.
I think a part of the reason why you don't see a lot of affordable housing going up, at mass scale is that the complexity of it is enormous. I mean, some funding sources, there'll be, multiple types of funding sources just to get that funding source. So you actually need a bridge financing that's not shown here. You need a donation loan that's not shown here. I think if they can simplify the process from like a state level, that would really ease up a lot of the time that it takes to get these things underway. I did this at your request to really show folks just the kind of a sobering look at, what goes into making this project possible. I think a lot of people see the large, the $30 million cost, and they're like, well, the state just wrote them a check for 30 million. But it's really so far from that. They're all make up of a variety of different loans, soft loans, mezzanine loans, different types of loans.
Wow.
Right.
That's really how you get these deals structured.
So for an organization like we are, who really would like to find willing landlords who have old buildings that people are living in, to make more energy efficient so that people can be more comfortable and we can lower our carbon footprint, et cetera. What funding sources would you think that we would be eligible for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the kind of the base ones are going to be, the federal energy credit is always a time-tested one that is currently in use. I find that the federal credit, the challenge of it is unless there's a syndication model where somebody's really valuing the federal credit, sometimes a for-profit entity, this could occur. But I know for us, as a nonprofit, we obviously have no use for the federal credit just by the nature of our tax status. So it takes certain borrowing entities that can utilize and see the value of a federal tax credit. But that is a big one. You can get boosters from 30% credit to 40% credit. The credit also can encompass a lot of things like the energy efficiency upgrades, not just the solar, not just that it can encompass further. Beyond that, I mean, Mass Save is always a time-tested one. So this property right here was eligible for about, I think, $600,000 of Mass Save rebates. So it was a good amount. We were able to get from, I think, 3 different programs through Mass Save through the custom commercial path, which I highly recommend. They had a really great program path for us. The other funding sources that we were able to get that were energy related are the DOER decarbonization program, which currently is currently active. It does want to focus in on moderate to low income housing. But I think the other big one that we're starting to see, and I'm eager to see how the next few weeks are going to bring, but the IRA funding from the federal, basically, a lot of the federal funds don't actually come into this project directly. Federal funds typically will get kind of siphoned out to different states. And then those state agencies will then create these programs. And basically what you're seeing here, these are all just different programs coming out of different legislation. I mean, through different years. And some of them have, some money, some of them get refilled. It's almost easier to refill an existing program than it is to create a new one. But what you're seeing, or obviously the latest change in the last few weeks is, made kind of damper this is what we're probably unfortunately going to see. But, I still think it's going to be a good lag between now and when you would even see any rollback. And I'm still hoping out that there won't be any rollback of that stuff, but I feel like within the state there is going to be a doubling down of energy efficiency programs, beyond just these ones that we got, the Climate Ready and the DOER. I think the other challenge that you'll see is a project this size gets more state attention, which is an unfortunate kind of truth. But part of it is sometimes these smaller projects, they're not worth the time and energy for the attorneys and folks out in Boston to really deploy their time and resources to. There are smaller programs out there. There's I think not the PACE, but there's a couple ones that I can get back to folks on, and it might ring my bell here in a little bit, but there's a few of these kind of smaller programs that will target, 2 to 4 units. They'll target dorms. But to kind of summarize, the really the time-tested ones right now are the mass save incentive, the energy credit, and then to some degree, state financing that's coming down through the IRA. I think we all want to see more. And I think, that's just kind of the sobering aspect of where we're at. And something that maybe we can get out of this call is saying, hey, maybe we need more funding sources for energy efficiency, not just housing, but kind of, providing that greening of the existing stock that we have. And can I just add one more thing here? What I've also realized is that new production has taken a much higher priority for the state than preservation, which is unfortunate. It really is. I think, if you bring a project that's just taking existing affordable units and greening them and making them, basically renovating them, you're not going to get funded right now. That's just the truth of the matter, is that the governor right now is focusing on new production units, and maybe rightfully so with the housing crisis, but it is unfortunate for some of our housing stock that is depreciated. Like Valley, we have a lot of older properties that would love to get some funds from the state to rehabilitate them, to do green energy, but it's not attractive for the state right now. And I think that's something that, whether for better or for worse, that's kind of the current environment that I've seen.
Thank you.
Denise.
Yeah, so thinking about your characterization of the embodied carbon and how much more sense it makes to use existing buildings if you can, if they're in good shape, instead of building new ones, because we obviously critically need new housing units. And so I'm wondering, I know there are big problems with using things like existing shopping malls or hotels or even some of the old mill buildings. I'm just wondering if there are sort of target kinds of pieces of property, that this would be feasible for. And then the other question is, there's the soft debt and the hard debt. So who pays the hard debt? That's the part that has like interest payments that have to be paid back, right? So where does that money come from? Is that rent, or, how does that get serviced?
Yeah, so we do actually, these properties do generate revenue. For this one in particular, out of the 60 units, we have 20 that are on project-based vouchers. So these are units that are Section 8 or MRVP. They're folks who make kind of 30% of the area median income. Typically, for affordable housing, basically everybody pays a third of their income for rent. So basically, if you make $900 a month, you'll pay $300, right? And that's your rent. For the 30% AMI units, we apply for what's called a rental subsidy through the state. So those are the project-based vouchers. They sit in the property for those units for, I think, 30, 40 years. So we'll get Section 8 funds that'll pay for basically the difference between what the tenant can pay and what is kind of called a fair market rent. So usually those lower income units actually make a little bit more money than the moderate income units, which might be 600, right? And then in our case, we have workforce units, which are kind of almost like in our case, we could actually charge a lot more for the workforce units, but our philosophy is on providing stable housing. So I think for the 2 beds, it's like 1,600 as our workforce units. They're basically what you'd call kind of moderate income. They're achievable rents. But that revenue pays for the operations of the building. And then in our case, we have enough money to basically pay for senior loan, which in our case is a good loan. It's a 40-year amortization loan. You don't see them when you're buying your own house, but we have a HUD kind of 40-year mass housing loan in this project. So it allows you to take on a lot of debt that isn't as much payment each month.
Yeah.
Good question. And the soft debt does get paid if there's surplus revenue. So, these deals, almost the owner really doesn't ever end up getting any amount of money from them, because they'll get siphoned in, so many different ways over time.
Darcy.
I just wanted to see if you could give some information about your retrofit. We talked to the Ithaca people about their program of retrofitting 600 buildings, and we talked to another person from Eastern Mass who was doing exterior retrofits. I don't know if you've heard of that, but just wondering, like, and you don't have to go into extreme detail, but I'm just interested in knowing, like, what kind of insulation are you doing in your walls and your roof, and what are you replacing all your windows?
Yeah, so I guess the window question, I'll answer that really quick since believe it or not, the windows had asbestos.
Oh,
So at one point we were going to keep them, but usually when you keep something that's like somewhat depreciated, the funders that we have usually will make you kind of stockpile cash to fix it, in year 5 or 10. So in our case, we did new windows. But I usually kind of have a guiding philosophy of basically hierarchy of energy efficiency needs, right? And the foundation of that is weatherization. So really, this whole foundation is based off of the return on investment for those measures. So you should always be utilizing the ones that have the best bang for the buck, and insulation is usually the first of that. Beyond that, I after you get a nice insulated, airtight, and efficient building, then from there you look at the mechanical systems because typically they can be smaller now at that point. And then usually will be all electric in our case. And then that kind of tip of the pyramid is your renewables, so geothermal and solar in our case. The idea is that, if you take an inefficient building, you're going to spend a lot more, money, a lot more carbon, littering it with solar PV. And it's more efficient to some degree to just basically plug the holes up, and do that. So to talk about, I guess, what we're doing here, we have largely spray foam on the interior. At some point, you can't go beyond on the interior anymore. That's why you see the exterior insulation as well, because you basically, the long story short, is you want the dew point of the air to condensate on the exterior of the building, so water can come out and it doesn't create a mold environment. So we're really had our hands tied a little bit unless we wanted to put insulation on the exterior. So that was kind of, I won't say it's the most robust interior envelope. We are beyond code, but it's really an airtight building is more than anything. And then from there, the mechanicals is the priority and focus of our attention.
Did you have to install a ventilation system?
Yeah, we have them. You can kind of see here these two bigger mammoths on the top of the roof here. This is what's called an ERV. It basically brings in fresh air, brings it into each unit, and then it allows the air to be tempered. And actually, our geothermal system does connect to these ERVs. So typically, these will have an electric resistance reheat element. So when it's really cold, they'll turn on this electric heater. In our case, that actually pulls from this loop of the wells in the ground. So it's actually a lot more efficient, this type of ventilation that we have.
Interesting. Eric.
Hi, wow, this is fantastic. Thank you for all this information and to Leah for bringing you here. 2 questions real quick. One, and I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on right now.
Okay.
I'm curious how much of the geothermal, how much the solar will have enough capacity to power the pumps, I'm assuming. What else will it provide for the building, or are you going to be a net, will you be a net importer of electricity? It seems like almost certainly, but how, I can't tell. So there's that. And then also, I just didn't see in the cost allocations anything for design. It must have been embedded within. And is that the general contractor taking that on, or was that spread across each?
I got good answers to your questions here. To give you, I guess I know very, very early on, I think when I was just talking to Adele and other folks here, I was talking about kind of an energy rating, right? But buildings have what's called an EUI. It's energy use intensity. It's like basically a per square foot calculation of the energy of the building. I find it interesting. It's almost like $1 per square foot. So you can kind of, once you understand it, you can kind of compare different buildings. This was a 70 EUI building back when it was a nursing home. Typically kind of new construction going in right now, maybe is like a 50, 40 EUI. In our case, I think it goes down to about a 30. But once you plug in the solar and the geothermal, we're actually almost, I think, basically a 5 EUI. So once you go below zero, you're effectively net zero. So in our case, we're pretty close to it. I do have the caveat that we're installing solar in phases. So we are doing, I think, about half of the building, but we're basically waiting to see, do we have enough money from construction to do that last bit of the solar? We'll kind of make it to no-go decision on it. And then to answer what was the other design one? That's in our soft cost. So typically a development project, we have maybe about, I'd say maybe 20 different soft cost categories. They range from, insurance, your carrying cost of snow removal, finance fees. We probably have, a lot of construction loan interest is always a big one. In our case, we have architecture and engineering. But this building, actually, we did have the contractor. It was a design build project. We brought in Salumi Construction early on to work with the architect to basically advance the plans. Helped out tremendously. In our case, we actually had the mechanical and geothermal engineers underneath the contractor, which is very different. I've never done it before like this, and allows more tighter coordination where the contractor owns the design, so they're not pointing fingers at us and saying, "Hey, this is not done right." It allows for that to really, I think, be a smoother process, and allows for that design build method, which I always like, is a very integrative design where in our case the plumbers, folks that probably aren't into this project until right when it starts construction, are providing feedback very, very early on in the schematic of the building, right? So it allows us to really optimize the cost.
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of LEED. I don't know if you, but and can you name the contractor, the design build?
Yeah, we did Salumi Construction is the contractor,
Okay.
and then Austin Design out of Greenfield is the architect.
Thank you.
I have a question. Did you consider certification like LEED?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I like building certifications. I actually used to work with USGBC for the LEED programs, and I think LEED's tricky because it touches on a lot of different topics, not just energy. It touches on water conservation, other ones. And in our case, typically it's funding driven, where I think the big one that we're seeing a lot is Passive House has taken a real interest from the state. We do have a couple of Passive House projects, one that just finished construction in Amherst. In our case, we were really limited where, if you weren't providing insulation on the exterior, you really weren't hitting a lot of these programs. I think there's a few rehab programs that we could have hit, but I think it would have just cost a little bit extra on the certification aspect. And kind of how we looked at it is, we're providing that innovative solution to geothermal. So that was really for us. I think maybe looking back, could we have went for, a different certificate, like some sort of certification for the building? I think probably, but I kind of looked at it as wasn't a huge value for, where we were in the marketplace. And it's kind of that decision changes throughout the years as what state, wants to focus in on. But it was kind of Passive House or nothing was kind of how the state was looking at this. So I didn't think if we were to go for a certain like a LEED certification, it would really make a difference for us on the funding end. And that's ultimately where I usually see the certification, coming in, is it helps for funding, it helps for sale and disposition of the property. In our case, we didn't really need that benefit for either. It's a good question. I don't think that's a great answer, honestly, but I think I just wanted to be candid and open, that we chose consciously not to go for a building certification, coming from a background of, I was pushing green certifications for a while. So.
Well, thank you, Bill. This has been quite an interesting and educational presentation. This is great. I'm not sure where we're going to go from there, but this is a really good start.
Yeah, I think, I mean, really the next steps, if I were to give folks any, amount of guidance on, what would help see more adaptive reuse in the light of energy efficiency and sustainability. I think, it's providing, showing up at meetings and asking for this type of stuff. And if the city has only so much money and they want to support, one project and there's, 3 projects, right? Like which one's, really doing the, being, innovative and doing, sustainability is a key feature of the project. I also think, getting funding for smaller projects is really important. I think it's an underserved area. I think it's an unfortunate truth right now that these bigger projects, take the attention and the funds. And then I think, just hoping that not a lot of changes happen through the IRA. I think if the IRA's funding can really start to trickle down to the state, I think that'll be a big help. And I really hope it doesn't reel back is I think big. And I know a lot of that's out of our control, but those are kind of the 3 things that we're tracking, and I think our macro level stuff that can make a big difference.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
For inspiring us.
Thank you.
I appreciate you having me, and yeah, thank you for your interest in this project. It's definitely a labor of love, and will be completion, I think, is targeting for August of next year, and
Great.
we'll start to then lease up the property. You'll start to see more information about our lottery process that we do about midway through construction. And I'm sure you'll be seeing some more photos of the completed building. Unfortunately, the geothermal isn't as photographic as the solar. But,
No.
and if folks have any questions, my information was on that first slide. But you can always look up the Valley's website, and you can see my email. It's just www.valleycdc.org. I'm happy to answer any other questions that folks have maybe after this call if folks want to just send me an email.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mm.